The wind on Stone Crown Ridge does not howl. It screams like something alive, like something hungry. On the third night of the Black Christmas blizzard, a woman climbed out of a hole in the mountain with her bare hands. The temperature was 47 below zero. The snow flew sideways at 70 miles an hour. Her hair froze to her face. Her fingers split open against the ice. But she kept digging. Inside that hole, behind a wall of basalt and timber, her little girl was coughing. 5 years old. Cheeks the color of new milk. And if her mother did not clear that vent shaft in the next 10 minutes, the smoke would do what the cold could not. Her name was Ingrid Halverson. 3 months earlier, the people of Holopine, Dakota Territory had called her a fool. They had called her a witch. They had called her worse things quietly in the corners of the general store. They said she was raising her child in a hole like an animal. They said she would not last until Christmas. By the time Christmas came, half of them would be kneeling at her door. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to October, to the day Ingrid Halverson stood on the porch of Belforche Ranch, holding her daughter's hand, and watched the only family she had left in the world turn his back on her. She was 32 years old. Born in a fishing village on the western coast of Norway, in a place called Telemark, where the mountains came down to meet the sea and where winter lasted from October until May. Her grandfather raised her, bestefar she called him, the Norwegian word for grandfather. He was a stonemason, a quiet man, big hands, soft voice. He had built churches in the old country, and he had built shelters for shepherds high in the mountain pastures, where the wind could turn a man to ice in 20 minutes. He taught her the old word, felpust, mountain breath. He told her the stone remembers, the stone breathes. If you listen, the stone will tell you where the warm places are, where the cold places are, where the wind sleeps, where the wind hides. She was 9 years old when he died. She crossed the ocean with her mother and her older sister Marin in 1849. They settled in Minnesota first. Then her mother died of childbed fever. Then they moved west with relatives. Then those relatives died too. The frontier ate people slowly. Then suddenly. Then slowly again. By 1859, only Ingrid and Marin were left. Marin married a rancher named Cyrus Beckwith, a tall, bearded man with eyes the color of Cold Creek water. He had 300 head of cattle and 4,000 acres on the edge of the Black Hills. Marin wrote to Ingrid every month from the ranch. Her letters were short. Her letters were strange. Then Ingrid met Erik. Erik Halverson was a logger, Norwegian too, but second generation. American as the pines he cut. They married in the spring of 1857. Their daughter Annika was born the next year in a one-room cabin on the Missouri River. Erik used to come home in the evenings and sing the old songs to the baby. He had a low voice, the kind that made the dogs settle. He died in the spring of 1862. A widowmaker, the loggers call it. A dead branch from above. It came down without warning. He never even saw it. Ingrid was 29 years old. She buried him on a hillside facing the river. She sold the cabin. She took Annika and went west to be with Marin. She had nowhere else to go. That was the spring of 1862. 18 months later, Marin was dead too. Marin died in July of 1863. Cyrus said it was diphtheria, the bull neck disease, the kind that closes a throat from the inside. But Marin had not seemed sick, not until the last 2 weeks. She had been writing letters that she did not send. Ingrid found them later, in a drawer. Small pages folded twice, the ink uneven. Letters that began Dear Ingrid and then trailed off into half thoughts. Letters that mentioned the tea Cyrus made her at night. Letters that mentioned the way she could not stay awake past sundown anymore. Letters that Ingrid would not read carefully until much, much later. At the funeral, Cyrus stood beside the grave with his hat in his hands. He did not cry. He looked at Ingrid across the open earth, and his eyes were the color of Cold Creek water, and they were also something else. They were angry. 3 months passed. October came. The aspens on the ridges turned gold and then brown. The geese flew south in long, ragged lines. The wind off the Black Hills carried the first taste of winter. That dry, metallic smell that frontier women learn to fear by the time they are 12 years old. And then one Tuesday morning, Cyrus Beckwith came into the kitchen of the ranch house and told Ingrid Halverson to get out. He did not raise his voice. He stood in the doorway with his hat still on. Annika was at the table eating bread and honey. The dog Odin was asleep by the stove. The kettle was whistling. "You'll be leaving today," Cyrus said. Ingrid set down the kettle. She was a tall woman, strong in the shoulders. Her hair was the pale wheat color of her mother's people, pulled back tight against her skull. She wore a black dress because she was still in mourning. Where, she said, your folks left you that piece of ground up at Stone Crown. The bench above the creek. That cave, too. That's your inheritance, not this house. This house is mine. Annika stopped chewing. There's no cabin up there, Ingrid said. There's a cave. Ceros, you brought the sickness here. His voice was flat now. You came west with your dead husband on your back and your dead luck in your skirts, and you put it in my Marin, and she died. I want you off this land before sundown. The kettle was still whistling. Ingrid reached over and lifted it off the stove. Her hands did not shake. She had learned a long time ago not to let her hands shake in front of men. Cyrus, she said again, she had a sickness in her throat. I did not give it to her. We were not even in this house when she got sick. You know that. He did not answer. He just looked at her with those creek water eyes, and then he said something that Ingrid would remember for the rest of her life, not because it was cruel. Cruel things had been said to her before. But because it was strange, he said, take the cave, Ingrid. It's yours. It was always meant for you. Then he turned around and walked out into the yard. She packed in 2 hours. The wagon was old. Cyrus did not give her the good one. She loaded the things that mattered, a trunk with their clothes, a small cast iron stove, 3 quilts, the cookware, her Bible, Eric's old buffalo coat, a box of dried beans and a sack of cornmeal, a jar of lard, a bundle of candles. Annika carried the dog. Odin was a Norwegian elkhound, gray and black, with the curled tail and the wedge-shaped head of his breed. He had been Eric's dog first. Now he was Annika's. He let the child carry him because he loved her. A grown elkhound is not a small dog. But he lay across her arms like a sack of meal, and he watched Ingrid load the wagon with quiet, patient eyes. Cyrus's younger sister, Verity, came out onto the porch as they were leaving. Verity was 28, slight. Brown hair pulled back simple. She had moved to the ranch a year ago to help with Marin during what everyone had thought at the time was a difficult pregnancy. The baby had not come. The doctors said Marin could not have children. Verity had stayed anyway. She stood on the porch now in her apron, and she watched Ingrid climb up onto the wagon seat with Annika, and she did not say anything. But her face said something. Ingrid would remember Verity's face for a long time, too. It was not pity, it was not embarrassment, it was something stranger than either of those things. It looked, more than anything, like fear. Stone Crown Ridge was 4 miles north of the ranch house. The trail climbed steadily through cottonwood stands, then through pine, then through a narrow defile where the basalt walls rose up on either side like the bones of some old buried animal. The wagon could only go so far. Then the trail narrowed, and Ingrid had to lead the horse on foot. It took them all afternoon. The cave was set into the south face of a black basalt cliff. The opening was about 8 feet high and 12 feet wide. Inside, it was dark, deep. Colder than the day outside, but a different kind of cold. Dry cold, still cold. Ingrid stood at the entrance with Annika beside her, and she looked into the dark. Mama, Annika said. I know, sweet pea. Is this where we live now? For now. Forever? No, not forever. Just until I figure out how to make it warm. Annika thought about this. Mama, she said again, I'm scared of the dark. Ingrid knelt down beside her daughter. The wind on the ridge was already turning. She could feel it on the back of her neck. I know, she said. I'm a little scared too, but listen to me. I'm going to tell you something my grandfather told me when I was just your size. Annika waited. The stone is not afraid of the dark, Ingrid said. The stone has been in the dark for 1,000 years. The stone knows things we don't know. And tonight, the stone is going to help us. Do you believe me? Annika nodded slowly. Good, Ingrid said. She kissed the top of her daughter's head. Then she lit a pine pitch torch from the lantern, and she carried it into the cave. The first thing she noticed was the air. Outside, the October wind was already finding the gaps in her coat. The kind of wind that warns, the kind of wind that says winter is not waiting for anybody this year. Inside the cave, the air was still not warm, not yet, but still. And dry, the torch flame burned without flickering. She walked in 20 feet, then 30, then 40. The chamber widened out and then narrowed again, and then she saw the second thing she would remember. On the eastern wall, the torch smoke bent. It did not rise straight up the way smoke is supposed to. It pulled sideways, drawn into a crack in the basalt about head height, and it went into the crack and disappeared. The mountain was breathing. She stood there for a long time with the torch in her hand and the smoke moving past her shoulder. And she heard Bestifar's voice in her head as clear as if he were standing in the cave with her, smelling of pipe smoke and stone dust. The stone remembers, child. The stone breathes. If you listen, the stone will tell you everything. Odin came up beside her then. He sniffed the eastern wall. He sniffed the floor where it sloped slightly downward. He did not whine. He did not back away. He sat down on the basalt and looked at her with his amber eyes. The dog was not afraid. That was the moment Ingrid Halvorsen knew she could keep her daughter alive. Now, I want you to stop for just one moment. Imagine yourself standing where Ingrid is standing. A widow, 32 years old, a 5-year-old child clutching your skirt, the wind already turning cold on the ridge behind you. A black cave in front of you. Winter coming. Nobody coming to help? Would you have walked in? I want you to think about that, and when you are ready, write your answer in the comments below. I want to hear from you. And if this story is finding you the way good stories find the people who need them, please tap the like button. It tells me you are out there. It tells me to keep telling these stories. Now, let me go on. For the first 3 days, Ingrid did almost no building. She watched, she learned. She walked the cave by torchlight, morning and evening, and she traced the air with a tuft of milkweed fluff. Where the fluff drifted, she made a small mark on the wall with charcoal. By the end of the 3rd day, she had a map of the breadth of the mountain. The places where the air came in, the places where the air went out. The slow eddies in the back chamber where a person could sit through a blizzard and not even feel the wind. There was a fault on the eastern wall, about 4 feet up, a finger-wide crack that ran back into the rock for a long way and that pulled smoke and warm air upward, and that came out, she would learn later, in a vent on the ridge above. That was the chimney. The mountain had given her a chimney before she ever cut a single timber. On the morning of the 4th day, she rode the horse down to Hollow Pine for supplies. Hollow Pine in 1863 was a frontier settlement of maybe 300 souls. It had a general store, it had a blacksmith, it had a Methodist meeting house, it had a stable, it had a saloon, it had a sheriff's office, which was usually empty, and it had Cordelia Mosby. Cordelia Mosby ran the general store. She was a heavy-set woman of about 50, widowed twice, with a face like a closed Bible. She held the credit ledger for half the homesteaders in the valley. She decided who got winter flour and who did not. She decided whose accounts were paid up and whose were delinquent, and she decided what the town thought about everyone in it. When Ingrid walked into the store that morning, Cordelia was at her ledger. She did not look up. "Heard you got moved up to Stone Crown," she said. "Yes," said Ingrid. "With the child." "Yes." "In a cave." "Yes." Cordelia made a small mark in her ledger. Then she set down her pen. "Lamp oil's gone up," she said. "Demand." "How much?" $1.25 a gallon. It had been 60 cents a gallon 2 weeks ago. Ingrid did not say anything. She just nodded. She bought what she could. Salt, coffee, a small can of lard, 2 coils of rope. She paid in coin because her credit had quietly disappeared sometime between Marin's funeral and this morning. When she was at the door, Cordelia spoke again. "Mrs. Halvorsen," Ingrid turned. "There's territorial officials in Yankton," Cordelia said, "who take an interest in children being raised in unsuitable conditions. I'm just telling you what I know. As a Christian woman," Ingrid looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You will see." She walked out. That was the first time she said it, those 3 words. She did not know it then, but those 3 words were going to become her name in the valley before Christmas was over. The Norwegian woman who said, "You will see." The Norwegian woman who would not argue. The Norwegian woman in the cave. You will see. Now, the great mercy of those weeks, the only mercy, was an old man named Obadiah Crane. Obi, the children called him, Old Obi. He was 68 years old, a trapper. He lived alone in a low stone shelter built into the side of a hill about 3 miles north of the cave, on what had once been Pawnee land and what was now nobody's land. He had been there for 40 years. He came down to Hollow Pine maybe 4 times a year to sell hides and buy salt and read the newspapers from Street Louie. He found her on the 2nd week of October. She was sawing lodgepole pine on the slope below the cave. She had cut 6 logs in 2 days. Her hands were ruined. She had wrapped them in strips from an old petticoat, and the strips were dark with blood. Obi stood in the trees and watched her for a long time before he came out. When he came out, Odin growled once, then stopped. The dog seemed to know him somehow. "Ma'am," said the old man. Ingrid set down the saw. "You'd be the Halverson woman?" "Yes. I knew your daddy." Ingrid blinked. She had not been called anyone's daughter in 20 years. Her father had died when she was 9. The same year Bestafar had died, 2 graves in 2 seasons. She had not known there was anyone alive in this country who had even known his name. "You knew Lars Bergstrom?" "I knew him in 33. I knew him in 34. I taught him about that cave." She stared at him. Obadiah Crane was a small man, not tall like Cyrus, bent at the shoulders, white beard down to his second shirt button, eyes the color of weak coffee. He held a walking stick made from a piece of cherry wood that was as old and polished as he was. "You taught my father about the cave," she said slowly. "I taught him. He taught me too. He was a quarryman in the old country. Knew stone, knew the cold ground. He came out here in 32, and we worked some claims together up by lead. Then we built a winter shelter into the south face of a hill not far from here. That shelter was what he was going to bring your mama and your sister to when they came across. Then your mama wouldn't come west of Minnesota, and your daddy gave up the claim. But he kept the deed on that piece of ground up here. He told me, 'Obi, my younger girl is going to need that someday. Hold it for her.' That was 1,837. Ingrid sat down on the log she had been sawing. She put her face in her hands. Her father, dead 26 years, had left her a cave. He had known she would need it. Obi came every day for the next week. He did not do the work for her. He was too old and too proud, and she was too proud as well, but he taught her, and what he taught her was older than the United States. He taught her about the throat wall, a double timber wall that narrows the opening of the cave so that warm air is trapped behind it and cold air does not flood in. The throat wall has to be exactly the right width. Too narrow and the smoke chokes you. Too wide and the heat leaks out. He sketched it in the dirt with a stick. He taught her about the drainage trench, a shallow channel cut along the eastern edge of the floor so that any meltwater from boots or blankets ran out instead of pooling. He taught her about the basalt bench, a long, low platform of stacked river stones set against the warm wall of the chamber that you build fires next to in the daytime, and that releases heat slowly all through the night. The stone holds the warmth. The stone gives it back. The stone breathes. And he taught her, most importantly, about the vent. "Cave can kill you 2 ways, Obi said." He was sitting on a flat rock outside the entrance. Annika was beside him, watching him whittle a small wooden horse for her. Odin lay at his feet. "First way is the cold gets in. That's the easy way. The fire keeps that out. But the second way," he paused, he worked the knife. "The second way is the smoke don't go out. The vent freezes shut. The fire keeps burning. And the smoke comes back down, and it lulls you to sleep. And you don't wake up." He looked at Ingrid. His eyes were very clear and very far away. "That happened to my grandson," he said. 1,839. He was 9 years old. We had a shelter on Cottonwood Pass. I built it tight. I built it warm, but I didn't know enough about the vent then. And one night the wind shifted and the snow packed up against the chimney pipe. He went to sleep. He didn't wake up. Your daddy was with me that winter. He helped me bury the boy. The wind moved through the pines. Annika kept very still, the way children do when adults are talking about something too big for them. After that, Obi said quietly, "Your daddy and me, we had words. Hard words. He said it was my fault, it was my fault. He left, went back east for a year. When he came back, things weren't right between us. He moved his family down to the river country. He died 10 years later. Threw from a horse, they said. I never quite believed it. He was the best rider I ever knew." Ingrid did not know what to say. "I'm telling you this," Obi said, "because the cave is going to ask things of you. And I owe your daddy a debt I can't ever pay. So I am going to make sure that this time, this winter, the vent stays clear. Do you understand me?" She nodded. "Yes," she said. "I understand you." He went back to whittling the wooden horse. But that night, after Obi had gone home and Annika was asleep on a pile of quilts against the basalt wall, Ingrid was cleaning out a side chamber of the cave to use for storage. She moved a flat stone that had been wedged into a crack at about waist height. Behind it, tucked back into a hollow, there was something pale. She reached in carefully. It was a handkerchief. Linen, embroidered along the edge with small wild roses and red thread, the kind of needlework her sister Marin had been doing since she was 12 years old. Marin's stitches, Marin's flowers, Marin's small, careful hand. The handkerchief had been folded into a tight square. Ingrid unfolded it slowly by the firelight. The center of it was stained dark, not with mud, not with old water, with blood, dry, old, brown. Ingrid sat down on the cave floor with the handkerchief in her hands. The fire crackled softly. Odin lifted his head and watched her. Annika breathed slow and even in her sleep. Her sister had been in this cave. Her sister, who had never once in 3 years of letters mentioned the cave at Stone Crown. Her sister, whose husband had thrown her out of the ranch and told her, "Take the cave, it was always meant for you." Her sister, who had died in July of a sickness that had not seemed like a sickness until the last 2 weeks. Ingrid sat there for a long time. Outside, somewhere on the ridge above the cave, the October wind was already changing. She did not know it yet. She did not even suspect it yet. But she was holding in her hands the first thread of something that was going to unravel everything she thought she knew about her sister, her brother-in-law, her father, and the piece of ground her family had been holding for her since before she was born. The mountain was breathing. The mountain was about to tell her everything. That is the end of part 1. Before we go on to part 2, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about the people in your own life, the ones who were turned away, the ones who were called fools, the ones who were told they would not last the winter. How many of them lasted? How many of them built something nobody believed in? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one. And if you are still with me, if this story is keeping you warm tonight, the way Ingrid's cave is going to keep her daughter warm, then stay with me. Because we have not yet met the man who is going to come up that ridge in 2 months with murder in his coat. We have not yet learned what was really in Marin's tea. And we have not yet seen the storm. The storm is coming. But first, Ingrid has to build the wall. Stay with me. The first snow came on the 18th of October. It was light, almost gentle, the kind of snow that frontier women call a warning snow. It fell for one afternoon and one evening, and by morning the ridges were dusted white, the way a baker dusts a loaf with flour. Then the sun came up and most of it melted, but not all of it. On the north faces, in the hollows, a thin skin of white remained. Winter had put its hand on the door. Ingrid Halverson stood at the mouth of the cave that morning with a cup of coffee in her hands and watched the valley below turn from white back to brown. Annika was inside, still asleep under the quilts. Odin sat beside her on the basalt step, his thick gray coat ruffled by the wind, looking content the way only a northern dog looks content when the cold finally comes. She had 36 days, maybe 40, before the real snow came. She had a cave, a stove, 6 logs, a vent that worked, and a daughter she would not bury. That was enough. She finished her coffee, she set down the cup, and she got to work. The throat wall came first. She had been gathering lodgepole pine for 2 weeks. Straight timbers, hand cut, dragged up the slope 1 log at a time with a rope across her shoulder and Odin pulling alongside her with a harness Obi had stitched for him from old elk hide. The dog took to it the way his breed took to anything that involved working in the cold. He pulled, he waited, he pulled again, he never complained. The wall would be a double row of timbers set vertically with a 14-inch gap between them. The gap was the secret. Bestefar had told her 60 years ago in a stone cottage above a fjord in Telemark. Dead air is the warmest blanket God ever made. 14 inches of still air trapped between 2 walls would insulate as well as 6 inches of solid wood, and it would weigh nothing, and it would breathe with the cave instead of against it. She set the first post on a Monday morning. She drove it into a notch. She had chipped in the basalt floor with the iron pick Obi had loaned her, and she wedged it tight with shale chips, and she tested it with her shoulder. It held. By the end of the week, the throat wall was 6 logs high. Sheriff Walton Crane came up the ridge on the 8th day. Walton Crane was a man of 36, lean as a rail, long jaw, eyes that did not blink as often as other people's eyes. He was Obadiah's nephew. His mother had been Obi's younger sister, dead, now 19 years. He had been the sheriff of the territorial district that included Hollow Pine for 9 years. He was good at his job. He was also, as OB put it once, his own kind of stubborn. He had not come to make trouble. He had come because Cordelia Mosby had written a letter to the territorial office in Yankton about a Norwegian widow raising a child in unsanitary conditions in a cave, and the territorial office had written back to him, and he was obliged by law to come look into the matter. He stood at the mouth of the cave with his hat in his hand. He looked at the throat wall. He looked at the basalt bench. He looked at the drainage trench. He looked at the small, neat wood pile under canvas. He looked at the child sitting cross-legged on a folded blanket, drawing pictures on a slate with a piece of soft chalk. Then he looked at Ingrid. Mrs. Halverson, he said, I am bound to tell you what I have come to see. I expected as much. This is irregular. I have not seen anything like this. I have lived in this country 30 years. I know. Caves are not houses, ma'am. This one is going to be. He chewed the inside of his cheek. A small habit. The kind a man develops when he has spent half his life being careful about what he says. My uncle says, you know what you are doing? I do. My uncle is the only man in this territory I would take that kind of word from. So I am going to tell my territorial office that the child appears clean, fed, and warm, and that I see no immediate cause for removal. But I am going to come back probably twice, probably more. Do you understand me? Yes. I have lived in Dakota 30 years, he said again. Caves are graves, ma'am, not houses. Ingrid looked at him for a long moment. You will see, she said. He put his hat back on. He did not smile, but something around the edges of his eyes shifted. Then he walked back down the trail to his horse. The story of that visit was around Hollow Pine before sundown. Sheriff Crane had gone up to the cave. Sheriff Crane had not taken the child. Sheriff Crane had said something about coming back. The blacksmith told it one way. Cordelia at the store told it another. The school teacher, a thin, nervous man named Pinckney, told it a third way with more Latin words in it. The valley was watching now. The next visitor was Tobias Hoyt. Tobias was 22 years old, a ranch hand. Worked for Cyrus at Belle Fourche. Tall, narrow, with a soft brown beard he was still trying to grow, and the kind of pale blue eyes that women in the saloon found dangerous in a way they did not quite mean as a compliment. He had been at Marin's funeral. He had stood at the back, holding his hat. He had watched Ingrid throw the first handful of earth onto the coffin, and he had wept openly without trying to hide it, the way only the very young can weep. He came up the ridge on a Sunday after church. He brought a sack of dried venison and a pound of coffee beans he had bought himself. He did not say much. Tobias was not a man of many words. He sat at the basalt bench while Ingrid heated water on the small stove, and he watched the way the warmth of the bench was rising up through the soles of his boots. Ma'am, he said finally, how is it warm in here? Stone, Ingrid said. Stone holds heat, wood does not. My bunkhouse at Belle Fourche is colder than this, and we have a stove going night and day. I know. He drank his coffee. He did not say anything for a long time. Mr. Beckwith says, I'm not to come up here again, he said quietly. I know. He says, you brought the sickness. I know. Tobias set his cup down. I was the one that fetched the doctor for Mrs. Marin, he said. In June. When she first took ill, I rode for him in the middle of the night. The doctor came out from Hollow Pine. He looked at her and he said it was a stomach ailment, not diphtheria. He said to keep her warm and give her broth. And he said something else. Tobias paused. He looked into the fire. He said for Mr. Beckwith to stop giving her that tea. The cave got very quiet. Ingrid did not move. She did not look at the boy. She just looked at her hands folded in her lap, and she made her face the way her grandfather had taught her to make her face when men were telling you something important and you did not want them to stop. What tea, she said. I don't know, ma'am. The doctor said it. The doctor said the tea was making it worse, and Mr. Beckwith said, yes, sir, and the doctor left. And the next morning, Mrs. Marin told me she had drunk the tea anyway. She said Cyrus made it for her every night, and she didn't want to cause a fuss. She said it tasted bitter. She said it tasted like willow bark and something else she didn't know. Ingrid kept her hands folded, and then she got worse, Tobias said quietly. And then she died. The fire popped. Tobias, Ingrid said, I want you to promise me something. Yes, ma'am. Do not tell anyone you came up here today. Do not tell anyone you told me this. Not your friends in the bunkhouse, not the boys in the saloon, not the preacher. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. And do not come up here again until I send for you. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. He stood up. He put his hat on. He looked at the child on the blanket, drawing. Mrs. Halverson, he said. I think Mrs. Marin was a good woman. I think she did not die of any sickness God ever made. Then he left. Ingrid sat at the bench for a long time after he was gone. 2 days later, on a gray Wednesday afternoon, a small bundle appeared at the mouth of the cave. Ingrid found it when she came back from gathering firewood. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen twine. There was no note. Inside the bundle were 3 things: a pound of good coffee, a small jar of honey from the Belforge pantry, and a folded square of cloth that, when Ingrid opened it, turned out to be a child's woolen scarf in a pale blue color that exactly matched Annika's eyes. On the inside of the scarf, stitched in small, careful letters, were the initials V.B. Verity Beckwith. Ingrid stood at the cave entrance for a long time with the scarf in her hands. She did not understand it. Not yet. But she understood enough to know that not every Beckwith in that valley was on the same side. And she understood enough to put the scarf around her daughter's neck that night and to say nothing and to wait. Verity, she would learn later, had been making small, careful visits to Hollow Pine for 3 weeks, to the post office, to the Reverend's house, to the small leather satchel where Marin's hidden letters, the ones Verity had found in a drawer after the funeral, had been slowly making their way, one at a time, into Reverend Forsythe's hands. The web was already being woven. Ingrid just could not see it yet. Annika came over and put her small head against her mother's shoulder. Mama, she said, are you crying? A little sweet pea? Why? Because your Aunt Marin was a good woman, and I miss her. I miss her too, said Annika. Ingrid put her arm around her daughter, and they sat like that on the basalt bench, the 2 of them, while the cave got slowly darker around them and the warmth from the stone seeped up through the wool of their dresses. Then Ingrid got up and lit the lamp. And she went to the back chamber where she had put Marin's handkerchief in a small tin box on a high ledge, and she started for the first time to look at it carefully. The handkerchief had been folded around something she had not noticed before. The fold was tight, square, deliberate, the kind of fold a woman makes when she is hiding something inside a piece of cloth and she does not want it to fall out. Ingrid sat down by the lamp and unfolded the handkerchief slowly. Inside, pressed flat by months of weight, was a folded paper. Not new paper, old paper, soft at the edges, folded into quarters. She opened it carefully. It was a page from a journal. The handwriting was Marin's. The date at the top was June 14th, 1863, 6 weeks before Marin died. Ingrid held it under the lamp, and she read, Sister, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have found the cave, and you have found this letter where I left it, and I want to tell you the things I could not tell you in the letters you got. I have been afraid to write them in letters that went through the post office at Hollow Pine. Cyrus reads my letters before they are sent. I have known this for 2 years. I have written things in the letters that I knew he would read, and I have written this for you separately, and I have hidden it where I think only you will find it. Cyrus has been giving me a tea. He calls it a tonic. He says his mother used to make it for women who could not have children. It is bitter. It is the color of weak coffee. He brings it to me every night, and he sits with me until I drink it. I have tried to refuse. He will not let me refuse. He says it is for my own good. I have not been able to stay awake past sundown for 6 months. I have not been able to keep food down for 3. I have lost weight that I cannot afford to lose. The doctor came in June. The doctor told Cyrus to stop the tea. Cyrus said he would. He has not stopped. I think he is killing me. I do not know why. I think it has something to do with the cave at Stone Crown. He goes up there alone, sister, 2 and 3 days at a time. He takes a pick and a shovel. He comes back with rocks in his saddlebag. Small, dark rocks. I have looked at them when he was not home. They have silver in them. I think they have silver in them. Father knew, mother knew. They kept the cave for you because they did not want it to come to him. He has been trying to find a way to get it ever since we married. I think he is going to wait until I am dead, and then he is going to make sure you cannot have it either, and then it will be his. Sister, if you are reading this, take Annika, go east. Do not stay in Dakota. Do not stay near him. He is not what he seems. He has never been what he seems. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I should have written to you sooner. I was afraid. I was so afraid of him that I could not even write the words. I love you. I have always loved you. Tell my niece I loved her too. Tell her Aunt Maren loved her more than the moon. Maren. Ingrid put the page down. She stared at the lamp. She did not cry, not yet. The crying would come later, in the deep middle of the night, after Annika was asleep, when she could put a quilt over her face so that the child would not hear her, but not yet. Now she just sat very still by the lamp and let her mind move through the things she now knew. Cyrus had killed her sister. Cyrus had done it slowly, over months, with something he had put in a tea. Cyrus had wanted her dead because of the cave at Stonecrown. The cave at Stonecrown had silver in it. Her father had known. Her mother had known. They had kept the cave for her because they did not want Cyrus to have it. And now Cyrus had thrown her, the widow, and her 5-year-old daughter up to that cave in October with one wagon of supplies and no help because he believed they would not last the winter. And after they died, by law of the territory, the parcel would lapse to the adjacent holder. The adjacent holder was Cyrus Beckwith. He was not just throwing her out. He was burying her. He was burying her in the very ground he wanted. Now I want you to stop with me for a moment. I want you to think about what Ingrid is feeling. Sitting in that cave, at that lamp, holding that letter from her dead sister. She is alone. The nearest help is an old trapper 3 miles away. The sheriff has come once and might or might not come back. Her brother-in-law, who already murdered once, owns half the valley. Her daughter is sleeping in the back chamber, and she has just learned that her sister was poisoned. What would you do? Would you take Annika and run east, like Maren told her to? Would you stay and finish the cave? Would you ride into Hollow Pine and tell the sheriff? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you would do. And whoever leaves the smartest answer, I am going to pin to the top of the comments. Because I think this is the moment in any good story where the woman in the cave becomes either a victim or something else entirely. Ingrid Halvorsen was about to become something else entirely. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the small stove until the moon came up over the eastern ridge, and then she went to the entrance of the cave and she stood there in the moonlight with the wind moving through her hair. Odin came and sat beside her. The dog leaned against her leg. She thought about running. It would not have been hard. Sheriff Crane was a decent man. She could ride down to Hollow Pine in the morning and tell him everything, show him the letter, show him the handkerchief, ask for protection, take the train east. There were Halvorsen cousins in Wisconsin. There were Bergstroms in Minnesota. There were places she could go where Cyrus Beckwith would never find her or her daughter. She thought about it for a long time. And then she thought about Maren. Maren, who had been alone in that ranch house for 2 years. Maren, who had not been allowed to send a real letter to her sister. Maren, who had drunk that tea night after night because she did not have the strength to refuse. Maren, who had hidden one folded letter in a basalt cave in case anybody ever came looking. Maren had not run. Maren had not been able to run, and Ingrid had not come for her. If she ran now, Maren would be a story Cyrus told at the saloon for the rest of his life. A sad story. A wife who got sick. A widow's sister who could not handle the country. A piece of land that fell by sad coincidence into his lap. If she ran now, nobody would ever know what he had done. She stood at the mouth of the cave a long time. Then she said out loud to her sister, to her grandfather, to her father, to whoever in the cold Norwegian heaven was listening, I will not run. Odin pushed his head against her hand. She went back inside and she banked the fire and she lay down beside her daughter on the quilts and she slept 4 hours of hard, dreamless sleep. In the morning, she went to find Obadiah Crane. She found him at his stone shelter splitting cedar. He stopped when he saw her face. He set the axe on the stump. He led her inside, and he poured her coffee from a tin pot that had been on the same iron stove for 40 years. She told him everything. The handkerchief, the letter, the tea, the rocks in Cyrus's saddlebag, the silver, her parents holding the cave for her, the plot to bury her on the land. Obi listened without saying a word. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I have to tell you something, and I should have told you a month ago. She waited. Your daddy did not fall off a horse, Obi said, not the way they said. In 1848, your daddy came up to my shelter one night and he said to me, Obi, I have a problem. A man has been asking after my daughter Ingrid in Minnesota. A young rancher out of Dakota, he has been asking about her holdings and her parents' holdings. He is not asking for the right reasons. Obi paused. He picked up his cup. He set it down again without drinking. The young rancher was Cyrus Beckwith. He was 26 years old then. He had just come into his father's place at Belfort. She was looking for a Norwegian wife. He was looking specifically for a Bergstrom daughter because his neighbor had told him about a piece of ground up at Stone Crown that nobody was working, but the deed was held by some Norwegian quarrymen in Minnesota who had 2 daughters. Obi looked at her. Your daddy was scared, Ingrid. He said to me, I have to ride back to Minnesota tomorrow. I have to get my girls and bring them out east. I cannot let this man find Ingrid. And he rode out the next morning. And he never made it home. They found him 3 days later in a coulee 20 miles east of here. Horse was standing nearby with the saddle still on. They said he fell. Broke his neck. I went and looked at the place. There were 2 sets of hoof prints in that coulee, Ingrid. Not 1, 2. You think Cyrus killed him? I think a young man who wanted that cave bad enough to kill a wife for it 25 years later did not start killing in 1863. I think he started in 1848. Ingrid felt the cold come up through the floor of Obi's shelter. Then he married Marin instead, she said slowly, because Marin was easier to get to. And he waited. He waited 15 years for Marin to die without children so the property would settle clean. He couldn't have known your mother would die and you would marry Halverson and have a child. He couldn't have planned for you. But when you came west to live with Marin, he saw his chance. Get rid of Marin, get rid of you, get rid of the child, get the cave. He has been planning this since I was 18 years old. He has been planning this since before you were 18. Ingrid set the coffee down. Her hands were shaking now. She did not try to stop them. Obi, she said, what do I do? The old man looked at her with his weak coffee eyes. You finish the cave, he said. You make it the warmest, strongest, most beautiful winter shelter that has ever been built on this ridge. You let him come up here in December thinking he is going to find 2 frozen bodies. And you let the cave show him who you are. She stared at him. That is not enough. It is enough for the first part. The second part takes longer. The second part is the law. We have your sister's letter. We have my testimony about your father. We have the boy Hoyt who heard the doctor say to stop the tea. We have time, Ingrid. We have all winter. By spring, we will have a case. And by spring, Sheriff Walton Crane is going to take that case to the territorial court in Yankton, and Cyrus Beckwith is going to stand in front of a judge. And if he does not wait until December, if he comes up the ridge with a gun before then, said Obi, you put your daughter in the back chamber, and you let the dog out the front, and you do what your daddy raised you to do. She looked at him. He looked back. I am 68 years old, Ingrid Halverson, and I made a man a promise 26 years ago that I did not keep. I am going to keep it now. I am not letting that man up that ridge. She nodded. She did not trust her voice yet. She got up, she put on her coat, she walked out into the morning sun. The first hard frost was on the ground. Now, I want you to understand something. From that morning until the storm came, Ingrid Halverson was no longer just a widow building a cave. She was something else. She was a stonemason's granddaughter. She was a murdered sister's only witness. She was a 5-year-old child's only living parent. She was a woman who had been given a piece of ground by a father who died trying to protect her, and a piece of knowledge by a grandfather who had taught her how mountains breathe. She was going to use both. The next 3 weeks, the cave grew. She finished the throat wall. She fitted the inner timbers and packed the gap with dry moss and woven grass. She layered shale slabs above the fire pit so the rising heat would bend deeper into the chamber instead of escaping straight up. She built the basalt bench longer, wider, with river stones stacked behind it that would hold heat for 14 hours after a fire went out. She cut a sleeping shelf into the western wall, 4 feet above the floor, away from the coldest ground air. She laid cedar poles across it and lashed them tight. She piled the quilts there. That would be Annika's bed. She widened the drainage trench and filled it with coarse gravel so that any melt or moisture would run down and out instead of pooling. She built a small second vent in the back chamber, a bypass vent, so that if the main vent ever froze, the air would still move. Obi helped her plan it. He said, never trust one chimney. The Sami people in the far north of Norway never trusted one chimney. They always had 2. The mountain rewards the cautious. She hung a clothesline between 2 iron spikes driven into basalt cracks, and for the first time in months, Annika's stockings dried overnight without going stiff. She brought Marin's handkerchief and Marin's letter and put them in a tin box, and she put the tin box in a niche behind a loose stone in the back chamber, and she set a fist-sized chunk of basalt over the niche so that no one could find it without knowing where to look. She nailed a small cedar shelf above the bench. She put on it Bestifar's old wooden pipe, which she had carried with her since 1849, and Eric's silver wedding band, which she could not wear anymore because her hands had grown too thin, and a small framed daguerreotype of Marin at her wedding, smiling that small, careful smile that Ingrid was only now learning to read. The cave became a house. The house became a home, and while she worked in the late evenings by the light of the small stove, she taught her how to read the smoke, how a steady, straight column meant the vent was good, how a wavering column meant the wind was changing, how a black streaking column meant something was wrong and you went and got your mother. She taught her the names of the stones: basalt, shale, granite, sandstone. The stones of Telemark were granite mostly. The stones of Dakota were basalt. Both were good. Both remembered. She taught her the old words: felpust, mountain breath, stillhet, stillness, more, mother, dadder, daughter, bestifar, grandfather. The words of a country Annika would never see from a grandfather who had been dead 23 years. Annika repeated them by the stove. Odin slept at the foot of the sleeping shelf. Then, on the morning of November 22nd, Obadiah Crane came up the ridge at a run. He never ran. His knees had not let him run since 1858. He was running. Ingrid was outside, splitting a cedar branch for kindling. She set down the axe. "Pressure's gone," Obi said. He was out of breath. "Down at my shelter, the barometer is dropping faster than I have seen it drop since 1839. Birds went silent at dawn. Cattle down in the valley are huddling against the north fences. The sky over the Black Hills is the color of old iron." She straightened up slowly. "By storm? The biggest storm of my life? The kind they will name, the kind they will tell stories about in 50 years? How long? 3 days. Maybe 2. The mountain knows. The mountain has been telling me for a week and I did not want to believe it." Ingrid looked down at the valley. Smoke was rising thin and gray from the chimneys of Hollow Pine. Smoke was rising from the chimneys of Belforche Ranch. The valley below looked like every other late November valley in Dakota Territory. It did not look like a place where 67 people were going to die in the next 2 weeks. But it was, "All right," she said quietly. "All right, what?" "All right, we are ready." She turned and she walked back into the cave. She picked up Annika and held her tight against her shoulder. She looked at Odin, she looked at the throat wall, she looked at the basalt bench, she looked at the small stove and the wood pile and the sleeping shelf in the niche where her sister's letter was hidden. The mountain was breathing. She could feel it. She could hear it. The cave was ready. And the storm was coming. The Black Christmas blizzard came down out of Canada on the morning of December 19th, 1863. It came faster than anyone had predicted, faster even than Obadiah Crane had predicted. By 9 o'clock that morning, the sky over the Black Hills had gone the color of old iron pots. By 11, the first hard snow was blowing sideways across the ridges. By 2 in the afternoon, the temperature on the Stone Crown bench had fallen 40 degrees in 3 hours, and was still falling. By sundown, the world had disappeared. Inside the cave, Ingrid Halverson sat on the basalt bench and listened to the wind. The wind did not howl that night. Howling is what wind does when it is still trying to be wind. This wind had stopped pretending. This was something older. Something that came down from the high north every 20 or 30 years and reminded the plains and the foothills who actually own this country. It moved against the basalt cliff above the cave with a low, constant roar, like a freight train that does not stop, like a river of cold that does not run out. Annika slept on the sleeping shelf, wrapped in 3 quilts, her small hand curled near her face. Odin lay against her side, his big gray head across her ankles. The stove burned low and steady, not roaring, not wasting wood. Ingrid had banked it the way Bestafar had taught her, with 3 cedar logs crisscrossed over a bed of careful coals, the kind of fire that would burn for 6 hours without attention. The basalt bench under her was warm. The cave was warm. Outside, the temperature had fallen to 27 below. She slept in short pieces, an hour, 2 hours, then up to check the vent, then back down. She had learned in the 2 days Obi had given her to prepare, to sleep the way wolves sleep. Light, fast, ready. At 3 in the morning of the first night, the wind changed. She felt it before she heard it. The cave breathed differently. The smoke from the stove, which had been pulling cleanly up through the main vent for hours, suddenly hesitated, just for a moment. Then it pulled the other way. She was on her feet before her eyes were even open. She pulled on Eric's old buffalo coat. She pulled on the heavy wool mittens Bestafar had knit for her mother 60 years ago and that her mother had given to her on the boat across the Atlantic. She wrapped a long wool scarf twice around her face. She put on the snow boots with the elk-hide soles. She lit the small handheld lantern. She kissed her daughter's forehead. She said in Norwegian very quietly, Jeg strax tilbake, lillejente. I will be right back, little girl. Then she stepped out of the throat wall and into the storm. The wind hit her like a wall. It was not air anymore. It was something solid, something that wanted to push her back, something that wanted to lift her and throw her over the edge of the ridge into the ravine 300 feet below. She bent into it. She put one hand against the basalt cliff to keep her bearings. The snow flew so hard and so flat that it cut her cheeks above the scarf. The vent shaft was 20 feet to the right of the cave entrance, up a short slope of broken shale. She climbed it on her hands and knees. When she got to the top, she dropped down onto the snow next to the vent opening, and she shone the lantern at it. The vent was almost closed. Wind-packed ice and frozen snow had built up over it in 3 hours, leaving an opening no wider than her thumb. Through that opening, weak gray smoke was struggling upward. If she did not open it in the next 10 minutes, the smoke was going to start coming back down into the cave. If the smoke started coming back down into the cave, Annika would never wake up. She put down the lantern, she pulled the iron pry bar from inside her coat, and she started digging. The first blow shattered a chunk of ice the size of her fist. The second blow drove deeper. The pry bar slipped in her wet mittens, and she dropped it. It slid 2 feet down the slope before she caught it. She pulled it back. The third blow split the cap of ice that was choking the opening. She heard the suck of air, she heard the rush. The smoke from below punched upward through the vent in a clean black column, and the column turned silver in the lantern light, and the cave began to breathe again. She knelt there on the ridge in the storm for 10 more seconds, just to make sure. The vent held. She started back. Halfway down the shale slope, her right boot slipped on a patch of black ice she could not see. Her leg went out from under her. She fell sideways. She felt herself begin to slide down the slope toward the lip of the ridge, where the basalt dropped away into the ravine below. She got her left hand into a crack in the rock. The crack was the width of 2 fingers. She jammed her hand in sideways, and she made a fist, and she stopped sliding. She lay there on the ridge in the dark with her hand jammed into the basalt and the wind trying to take her over the edge. The lantern was gone, rolled away, probably broken somewhere down the slope. She lay there for what felt like a very long time. Then she heard something through the wind. A bark, not a frightened bark, a working bark, short, sharp, 3 times. Odin had come out into the storm. He had heard her fall. He had come out the throat wall. He had followed her scent in air that was 30 below zero and moving at 70 miles an hour because that was what his ancestors had been bred for in the mountains of Norway 1,000 years ago. He came up the shale slope on his belly, low to the ground, and he found her hand jammed in the crack, and he braced his front paws against a rock above her, and he barked once more, low, near her face. It said, "Get up." She got up. She used the dog as a brace. She pulled herself up by his harness. She got her feet under her. She got her balance back. And the two of them came down the shale slope together, 1 step at a time, with the wind trying to take them both. When she got back inside the throat wall, she fell to her knees and put her arms around the dog and pressed her face into his cold gray fur and cried for the first time since the night she had read Marin's letter. Annika did not wake up. The cave was warm. The mountain was breathing. The first night was the worst. But the second night was bad too, and the third night was bad, and on the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally began to ease. By then, Ingrid had climbed out to the vent 4 times. Each time she came back with less skin on her hands and more frost on her eyelashes. The 4th time, she came back coughing. The 4th time, Odin had to lead her the last 20 feet to the entrance because she could not see anymore through her frozen lashes. But the cave held. Annika slept. She woke for soup. She slept again. She did not cough once. On the morning of December 23rd, Ingrid stepped out of the throat wall and looked down at the world. The world was gone. The valley was a great white silent sea. The fences were gone. The wagon trail was gone. The cottonwoods along the creek were drifted up to their lower branches. The only thing that broke the white were the chimneys of Hollow Pine 3 miles south, where thin blue threads of smoke were rising into a sky that was finally pale and still. She counted the chimneys. She counted them again. Belle Fourche Ranch was almost 5 miles south by the wagon road. Belle Fourche Ranch sat in a hollow that you could see from the stone-crowned bench on a clear day. There was no smoke at Belle Fourche. She stood there in the morning sun with her breath hanging white in front of her face. There was no smoke. She knew, in the way a woman who has read her sister's letter and slept 4 hours in 3 days knows things, that something was very wrong. A man like Cyrus Beckwith did not let his fire go out in a 4-day blizzard. A man like Cyrus Beckwith kept the fire going if he had to chop the dining room chairs for fuel. He did not let smoke stop rising from his chimney, unless he wanted it to stop rising. She thought about that for a long time. Then she went back inside. She knelt by the sleeping shelf. She brushed her daughter's hair back from her face. Annika, she said softly, Mama has to go down the mountain for a few hours. Mr. Obi is going to come and sit with you. You stay here with Odin. You do exactly what Mr. Obi says. Do you understand? Annika nodded, sleepy. Mama, are you going to be back for supper? Yes, Sweet Pea. I will be back for supper. She kissed her daughter's forehead. She did not know if she would be back for supper, but this was the lie a mother told. She walked the 3 miles to Obi's shelter through snow up to her thighs. She told Obi what she had seen. She told Obi what she thought. She did not tell Obi what she planned to do, because she did not yet know herself. But Obi was a man who could read a face the way other men read a newspaper. He took down the long Sharps rifle from over his door. I am going with you, he said. No. Stay with Annika. If I am not back by dark, send word to Sheriff Crane in Hollow Pine. Tell him to come to Belforche with 2 deputies. Tell him to bring my sister's letter from the tin box in the back chamber. Tell him everything I told you. Ingrid. Obi, please stay with my daughter. The old man looked at her. He nodded. He took down a small object from a peg on the wall behind his stove. It was a single-shot Derringer pistol, brass-framed, the kind a riverboat gambler used to carry in his vest pocket in 1855. He pressed it into her hand. It was your daddy's, he said. He gave it to me to hold for you the day before he rode east. I have been holding it for 26 years. Take it now. She took it. She put it in the inside pocket of Eric's buffalo coat. She walked down to Belforche. The ranch house was dark when she came up the long, drift-buried lane. The barn was dark, the bunkhouse was dark, there were no tracks in the snow except a single set of horse tracks leading out toward the south road, made some hours ago, already partly filled in. Tobias Hoyt, she would learn later, had taken the only horse left and ridden for Hollow Pine to find help. 2 of the other ranch hands had died in the bunkhouse on the second night of the storm. The third was missing. The kitchen door was unbarred. Ingrid stepped inside. The kitchen smelled of cold ash and old grease. The stove was out. Long out. The water bucket beside it had a 1/2 inch of ice on top. She moved through the kitchen into the front room. Cyrus Beckwith was sitting in the wingback chair beside the dead fireplace. He was not slumped. He was not weak. He was sitting upright in a clean shirt with a heavy wool coat over his shoulders and a knit cap on his head. There was a small fire going in the fireplace. Very small. Just enough to keep him from freezing. Not enough to make smoke that anyone could see from a ridge 5 miles north. He was holding a long-bladed knife across his lap. He looked at her when she came through the doorway. His eyes were the color of Cold Creek water. They were also, she saw clearly for the first time, the eyes of a man who had been planning this conversation for a long time. Ingrid, he said, you came. She did not move from the doorway. You let the fire go out, she said. I let the smoke go out. You wanted me to think you needed help. I wanted you to think exactly that. She stood very still. And now I am here, and now you are here. He stood up slowly. He was not weak. He had been waiting. He had been eating. He had been keeping just enough fire for himself in the back room with a small, clean-burning stove that did not vent out the main chimney. He had banked the main chimney with snow himself 2 days ago. The knife was in his right hand now. You found the letter, he said, didn't you? Yes. Marin always wrote things down. Your father told me she would. He told me the spring before he died, watch out for that girl. She writes everything down, said it was the dangerous thing about her. I should have remembered. I should have searched the cave more carefully. I went through it 3 times. I never found the back niche. It was behind a stone. Yes. Well, he smiled. It was a small, careful smile. You always were the smarter sister. That is why your father held the cave for you and not for her. He knew. He told me once, before I married Marin, he said, my Ingrid is the one with the stone mind. Marin is soft. Ingrid is the granite girl. Take care of Marin. Do not take care of Ingrid. Ingrid takes care of herself. He told you that? He told me that in a coulee about 20 miles east of here, in May of 1848, just before his horse threw him. Ingrid did not move. He did not fall, did he? she said quietly. Of course he did not fall. He took one step toward her. Ingrid, listen to me. There is silver in that cave. There has always been silver in that cave. Your father found it in 1833. He showed it to your mother. They decided to keep it secret so that the railroad and the mining companies would not come and take this whole valley apart looking for more of it. They held the deed quietly for 15 years. Then your father told me about it because he thought he was going to make me his son-in-law. He thought he was offering me a daughter. Instead, he was offering me a fortune. You killed him. He was going to take you away from me before I'd even met you. I could not allow that. Then you married Marin. Marin was the price of the cave. The deed was held jointly. If Marin died without children, the entire parcel passed to you. So I waited 15 years for Marin to fail to conceive a child. And then I helped her along to her grave when it became clear she was going to live longer than I had patience for. And then I threw you up to the cave in October because I thought one Dakota winter would do what I could not be seen to do with my own hands. And when the winter did not kill me, then I would have to do it with my own hands. He took another step. Ingrid, there is silver enough in that cave to make us both rich. I do not need to kill you. I am offering you this. Give me the letter. Give me the handkerchief. Sign the deed over to me. I will give you $10,000 in gold and put you and the girl on a train to anywhere you want to go. New York, San Francisco, Boston. You will live the rest of your life like a queen. Marin is gone. Nothing I do now will bring her back. Nothing you do now will bring her back. Do you understand me? Take the money, take your daughter, live. She did not answer. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had killed her father in 1848 when she was 17 years old in Minnesota. She looked at the man who had married her sister as a price and waited 15 years and then poisoned her cup by cup in their own kitchen. She looked at the man who had thrown her and her 5-year-old daughter into a cave in October to die. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "You will see." He raised the knife. He took the third step toward her. And from the doorway behind him, from the kitchen, a voice said, "Cyrus, put it down." He froze. Ingrid did not move her eyes from his face, but over his shoulder she saw Verity Beckwith standing in the kitchen doorway in a black coat. She had a small carbine rifle braced against her shoulder. Her hands were steady, her eyes were not afraid. Verity, Cyrus said. He did not turn around. Go back to the kitchen. No. Verity, go back. I have been reading her letters for a year, Cyrus. The ones you did not let her send. The ones I found in her drawer after she died. I know what you did to Marin. I know what you did to her father. I know what you tried to do to her. I sent the letters to Reverend Forsyth 3 weeks ago. He has been with the territorial marshals in Yankton since the first day of the storm. They are coming up the road right now. They will be here by sundown. Cyrus did not move. You are my sister, he said. I was Marin's sister too, said Verity. By marriage, she was kinder to me in 2 years than you have been in my whole life. Put down the knife, Cyrus, or I will put it down for you. He did not put down the knife. Instead, he turned toward Verity. He turned and he took one step and he raised the knife as if he were going to throw it. Verity fired the carbine into the ceiling. The crack of the shot was enormous in the small front room. Plaster came down in a soft white shower around all three of them. The crows on the porch railing exploded into the cold sky. Cyrus dropped the knife. It hit the floorboards with a small, dull sound. He sat down very slowly in the wingback chair. He put his head in his hands. Behind him, outside, far down the south road, Ingrid heard, for the first time, the sound of horses coming, many horses, coming hard, coming through snow, at a gallop. The territorial marshals, Sheriff Walton Crane in the lead, Reverend Forsyth at his right shoulder with Marin's letters in a leather satchel against his chest, and ahead of them all, riding a borrowed mare he had nearly killed getting to Hollow Pine through the storm 3 days before, was Tobias Hoyt. The boy who had fetched the doctor from Marin in June, the boy who had been told never to come up to the cave again, the boy who, when the storm broke on December 22nd, had saddled the last living horse at Belfourche and ridden south through 5-foot drifts because he had finally understood what his employer was waiting for. His face was raw with cold. His eyes were raw with something else. He had ridden for 2 days without sleep. He had ridden for Marin. The reckoning was here. Verity lowered the carbine. She looked across the room at Ingrid. She did not smile. There was nothing to smile about, but her eyes were very steady and very tired and very kind. Sister Verity said, I am sorry it took me so long. Ingrid walked across the front room. She stepped over the knife on the floorboards. She walked past her brother-in-law where he sat with his head in his hands. And she put her arms around her sister-in-law and she held her while the horses came up the long drift-buried lane and the late December sun came through the front window of Belle Fourche Ranch for the first time in a week. Now, I want you to stop with me for one more moment. Because what happened next in the courts of the Dakota Territory in the spring of 1864 happened slowly, the way the law moves. Cyrus Beckwith was bound over for trial at the territorial court in Yankton. The evidence against him was Marin's letters, all of them, the ones she had sent and the ones she had hidden. The testimony was Tobias Hoyt's about the doctor and the tea. And Verity Beckwith's about the small brown glass bottle she had found in her brother's desk after the marshals took him into custody. The bottle, when the territorial chemist tested it, contained a tincture of arsenic distilled with willow bark to mask the bitterness. Cyrus was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor at the Dakota Territorial Penitentiary. The judge said in his written ruling that he could not, on the evidence presented, prove direct intent for the death of Lars Bergstrom in 1848, and so he could not hand down a sentence of death. But he could and did sentence Cyrus Beckwith for the slow murder of his wife, Marin Bergstrom Beckwith. 25 years. Cyrus Beckwith died in the penitentiary in 1871 of pneumonia. He was 49 years old. He is buried in an unmarked plot outside the prison walls. Nobody from his family ever came to claim the body. In the spring of 1864, while Cyrus was waiting for his trial at Yankton, Ingrid Halverson sat one evening at the basalt bench and read her sister's letter for the 7th time. She had read it 6 times before. 6 times the page had ended at the words, "Tell my niece I loved her more than the moon." But on the 7th time, she felt the paper, and the paper was thicker than it should have been. She held it up to the lamp. There were 2 pages pressed together so tightly that for 9 months she had been reading them as one. She separated them slowly with the edge of a pine needle. The second page was shorter. The handwriting was uneven. Marin had written it later, maybe the last week of her life. It said, "Sister, one more thing. Mama knew about the cave. She drew me a small map the year before she died, in case the day ever came when one of us had to use it. I am leaving the map for you in the tin box folded inside this letter. The vent on the eastern wall is what Bestafar would have called the breathing crack. Mama said it was the most important thing he ever taught her. She said Bestafar told her, every cave that breathes is a cave that loves you. Every cave that does not breathe is a cave that does not... Sister, the cave loves you. Mama knew it. Bestafar knew it. I have come to know it. The cave was always going to keep you. That is why Father held it for you. Not because of any silver. There is no silver in that cave, sister. There was never any silver. Cyrus has been digging for a vein that does not exist. Father told him there was silver only because he had to give Cyrus a reason to leave you alone in Minnesota. Father was protecting you with a lie. The cave is not a treasure. The cave is the treasure, the breath of it, the warmth of it, the way the stone remembers. That is what Mama left us. That is what I am leaving you. I love you. Take care of my niece. Tell her about Bestafar. Tell her about the breathing crack. Tell her the stone is on her side. Marin." Ingrid set the second page down beside the first. She did not cry. She had cried already in the long winter more than she would ever cry again. Instead, she put both pages back into the tin box. She set the box back in its niche behind the loose stone, and she looked at the eastern wall, at the breathing crack, at the place where Bestafar's voice had been waiting for her all along. There was no silver in the cave. There never had been. Cyrus Beckwith had murdered his wife and his father-in-law and tried to murder his sister-in-law and her child over a lie. A frightened father had told a greedy young man 15 years ago to keep his daughter safe in Minnesota. The cave had no fortune in it. The cave was the fortune. And the man who had spent 25 years trying to take it from her family had never in all that time understood what it actually was. Ingrid Halverson smiled, and for the first time since she had walked up the ridge in October, she smiled. But that came later. What came first, in the days right after the storm, was the long, quiet walk back up to Stone Crown. Ingrid Halverson rode back up the mountain in a sleigh with Sheriff Walton Crane driving, and Verity beside her, and Reverend Forsythe in the back wrapped in 2 buffalo robes. The sun came down through the cottonwoods. The snow in the valley was already starting to settle. The sky was the deep, clear blue that follows a great storm. The kind of blue you only see in the Dakotas. The kind of blue that makes you understand why people stay here. Obadiah Crane was sitting at the entrance of the cave with Annika on his lap. He was telling her a story about a fox. Odin was lying across both their feet. When Annika saw her mother, she got up and ran. She did not say anything. She just ran. She crossed 20 feet of snow in the white afternoon light, and she launched herself into her mother's arms, and she pressed her small face into her mother's neck. Mama, she said. Mama, mama, mama. I know, sweet pea. I know. I am here. That night, in the cave, with Obie and Verity and the Reverend and Sheriff Crane all crowded around the basalt bench, Ingrid Halverson made bread. She made it the way her mother had made it in Minnesota, with cornmeal and lard and a little molasses. She baked it in the small stove until the cave filled with the smell of warm flour and burnt sugar. They ate it with butter that the Reverend had brought up the ridge in a wooden tub. They drank coffee that Tobias Hoyt had brought up in a tin can. Odin lay against the warm basalt and slept the deep sleep of a working dog who has done his work. Outside, the temperature was still 22 below. Inside, the cave was warm. Cordelia Mosby came up the ridge in March. She brought a fruitcake she had made herself wrapped in cheesecloth. She brought it on foot because the wagon trail was still impassable. She came up the slope slowly, breathing hard, a 50-year-old widowed shopkeeper in a black wool coat. She stopped at the throat wall. She did not come inside. Ingrid came out to her. Cordelia held out the fruitcake. She looked at the ground. Mrs. Halverson, she said, I called you a fool. I called you worse than that. I wrote a letter to Yankton about you. I tried to take your child from you. I did all of these things to a woman in mourning, and I did them because I was afraid of something I did not understand. She looked up. I have lived in this country 30 years, and I have called myself a Christian woman every day of those 30 years. And I have not, in any of those 30 years, ever once been so wrong about a person as I was about you. I am sorry, Mrs. Halverson. I am ashamed, and I have come to ask if I can be of any use to you this spring. Ingrid looked at her for a long moment. Then she took the fruitcake. Come inside, Mrs. Mosby, she said. There is coffee. The story of that visit was around Hollow Pine before sundown, the way stories had a way of getting around Hollow Pine. But this story moved differently. This was not gossip. This was the beginning of something else. By the spring of 1864, 14 new cave shelters had been started across Dakota Territory. Ingrid taught the people who came, free of charge. She did not lecture. She did not boast. She walked them through the parts of the cave one at a time. The throat wall, the drainage trench, the basalt bench, the vent shaft, the bypass vent. Sheriff Walton Crane built one for his own homestead. So did Tobias Hoyt, who married a girl from Hollow Pine the next year and brought her up to a cave shelter he had carved out of a low cliff 3 miles east of Stone Crown. Reverend Forsyth never built one, but he came up to Stone Crown every Sunday afternoon after church for the rest of his life, and he and Ingrid would drink coffee and talk about Marin. Obadiah Crane died in the fall of 1864. He died in his sleep, 86 pounds, 69 years old. His heart, the doctor said, had been working too hard for too long, and it had finally finished its job. Ingrid buried him on the high basalt slope above the cave, facing east, where the sunrise hit first in the morning. She set a piece of cherry wood at the head of the grave, from the same tree as his old walking stick. She did not put a name on it. He had not wanted a name. He had said the spring before he died that the wind would know who he was. Beside his grave, she set a smaller stone. She put no name on that one either, but she knew, and the wind knew, that it was for the boy he had lost in 1839, the grandson. The 9-year-old in the shelter on Cottonwood Pass, she made her peace with him there on that ridge in October of 64. She thought he made his peace with her father, too. Sheriff Walton Crane came up the ridge the day Obadiah was buried. He did not speak at the grave. He was not a man who knew what to say at graves. He stood at the back with his hat in both hands, and he watched the old trapper go into the earth beside the small, unmarked stone for the boy who had died in 1839. Afterwards, when the others had gone back down to the cave for coffee, the sheriff stayed on the ridge. Ingrid found him there an hour later. He was sitting on a flat rock. He had not put his hat back on. He was the only family I had left, he said. Not looking at her, looking at the grave. After my mother died, when I was a boy, he was the only one who ever came for me. He took me hunting when I was 8 years old. He taught me to read sign. He taught me to be quiet in the woods. He taught me to be honest in the law. Ingrid did not say anything. I called your cave a grave, Mrs. Halverson. The first time I came up here, I said it twice. I remember He told me I was a fool to say that to you. He told me you were going to teach this whole territory how to keep a child alive in a Dakota winter. He told me to come back up here and apologize. I never did. He finally looked at her. I am apologizing now. Ingrid sat down on the rock beside him. Uh, Sheriff Crane, she said. He taught me too. He kept a promise to my father that took him 26 years to keep. He died with that promise kept. You do not need to apologize for anything. You need to come up here for coffee. The way he did every week, for as long as your knees will let you make the climb. The sheriff put his hat back on slowly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. He came up the ridge every Sunday for the next 22 years. Verity Beckwith stayed. She sold the ranch at Belforche to a family of Welsh immigrants in the summer of 65, and she came to live with Ingrid and Annika at Stonecrown. She never married. She helped raise Annika. She kept the books for the small surveying business that Ingrid started in 1868, when settlers began asking her to walk their land and tell them where to build. She lived to be 71 years old. She is buried on the high basalt slope beside the old trapper. Odin lived to be 14 years old. He died in the spring of 1872. He died the way good old dogs die, on a warm afternoon, on the basalt step at the mouth of the cave, with the sun on his gray muzzle and Annika's hand on his head. He had been blind in one eye for 2 years. He had not been able to climb the ridge for a year. He had been content to lie in the sun and watch the valley. Annika dug the grave herself. She was 13 years old. She picked a spot at the foot of the cherrywood marker over Obadiah. She lined the grave with pine boughs. She put Odin in wrapped in his old harness, the one Obi had stitched for him. She set a flat piece of basalt over the grave. On it, she carved with a chisel her mother had given her, Odin, working dog. He brought Mama home. Now, I want you to do one last thing for me. I want you to think about what one woman, alone in a cave, with a 5-year-old daughter and an old dog and a stonemason's grandfather's voice in her head, was able to do in 8 months in the winter of 1863. She survived a storm that killed 67 people in 4 counties. She caught a man who had been killing people since before she was 18. She freed her sister's name from a quiet grave. She built a shelter that 14 other families would copy by the next spring. And she taught her daughter that a woman who is told to die in a hole can build a house out of that hole instead. That is what Ingrid Halvorsen did. That is what the women of the frontier did again and again in places nobody remembers their names anymore. I want you to write a name in the comments. Write the name of a woman in your own family who built something nobody believed in. A grandmother, a great aunt, a mother, a sister, the kind of woman who did not get her name in any history book. The kind of woman who did not ask to be remembered. Write her name. I will read every one, and the next time I tell a story, I will be telling it for them. Annika Halvorsen grew up. She left the cave in 1879 to attend the Territorial Normal School in Yankton. She came back in 1882 with a teaching certificate and a husband, a quiet man named Henrik Solberg, who had been born in Minnesota of Norwegian parents and who had read about the Stone Crown Cave in a small article in the Yankton Press. They were married in the Methodist Meeting House in Hollow Pine in the summer of 1883. The Reverend Forsyth, 81 years old by then, performed the ceremony with shaking hands and a clear voice. Annika took over the surveying business. She had 4 children. She wrote a book in 1908 called The Breath of the Mountain, Cold Country Building in the Telemark Tradition. The book was used as a reference in homesteading classes at the University of Minnesota for 40 years. Ingrid Halvorsen died in the cave in October of 1903. She was 72 years old. She died in her own bed on the cedar sleeping shelf she had built herself, with Annika holding one hand and Verity holding the other. Her last words were in Norwegian. They were the same words Bestefar had said to her in the stone cottage above the fjord, the day before he died, when she was 9 years old. She said, "Fjellet puster, lit. The mountain breathes. Listen." She is buried on the high basalt slope above the cave between Obadiah Crane and Verity Beckwith and Eric Halvorsen, whose remains Annika had quietly brought west from the river country in 1896 and reburied beside the place where his widow had built her house. The cave itself stood empty for 40 years. Then in 1978, a team of engineers from South Dakota State University, doing field research on traditional cold climate vernacular architecture, climbed the Stone Crown Trail with instruments and notebooks and a great deal of skepticism. They came down a week later, changed The cave maintained an interior temperature of 54 degrees Fahrenheit when the outside air temperature was -11, with only a small wood stove burning on a low setting. Their measurements showed that the thermal performance of the cave was approximately 2.7 times more efficient than a conventional log cabin of the same square footage built under the same conditions. They published their findings in the Journal of Vernacular Architecture in the spring of 1980. The article was titled simply A Norwegian Cave Shelter in Dakota Territory, Lessons from 1863. The cave is now a protected historical site maintained by the Black Hills Historical Society. You can visit it, you can stand in the throat wall and feel the difference in the air. You can sit on the basalt bench and feel the warmth that the stone still gives back, 160 years after a 32-year-old widow first banked a fire against it. On the wall of the back chamber, behind a small protective glass, there is a piece of folded linen with wild roses embroidered in red thread along the edge. Beside it, behind the same glass, is a folded letter dated June 14th, 1863. You can read the letter. You should read the letter. There is also on the eastern wall, near the main vent shaft, a small piece of cherry wood with a few words carved into it. The carving was done by Annika Halvorsen Solberg in 1932, the year she turned 74, the last year she could still make the climb up to her mother's cave. The carving says, the mountain breathes, listen, she did. The wind on Stone Crown Ridge does not howl. The wind on Stone Crown Ridge breathes. And if you listen carefully, on a cold December evening in the foothills of the Black Hills, you can still hear, somewhere deep in the basalt, the voice of a Norwegian grandfather telling his 9-year-old granddaughter how to listen. The mountain held her name. It held her daughter's name. It held her sister's name. It holds them still. And now, so do you. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. If it warmed something in you tonight, please share it with one woman in your life who needs to hear it. Maybe a daughter, maybe a sister, maybe a friend who has been told she is foolish for building the thing she is building. She is not foolish. She is Ingrid Halvorsen. And the mountain is breathing for her too. Good night.